Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today I have with me Rebecca Glass Lowe. She's going to be sharing about the importance of building relationships with students. And I know we hear that all the time in our college courses, but it is true. We have to build relationships from day one. No matter what grade level or subject that we teach, we are working with students. We need to get to know them as the unique individuals that they are, knowing their values, their strengths, and their areas of need, because we all have glows and grows, right? So let's jump into today's episode. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here. So let's start off with telling us a little bit about yourself and your teaching story.
Okay, so I am a secondary social studies teacher. I came into teaching a little bit late. I started out, I didn't think I ever wanted to be a teacher. I remember looking at my 8th grade U.S. history teacher going, why would you come back to middle school? Right? Like it's such a hard time. But I just love history. And when I was getting my undergraduate degree in history, I was a TA for a class and I loved it. And I worked at a law firm for several years, and then I decided I wanted to go back and give teaching a shot, and I just fell in love with it. So I've been teaching for 7 years, all at the high school level, but I've taught everything from freshmen to in world history to seniors in U.S. government. So I've kind of run the gambit there. And then I also have a podcast called History from Room 213. So that's kind of all encompassing of my free time. And I've got a family and I live in Indiana.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. It sounds like you teach a lot of different coursework and you're also a career switcher from working in law to now being a teacher. I'm sure your day-to-day looks very different and the conversations that you have probably different.
Yes, very, very
But
different.
congratulations on your 7th year of teaching.
Yes.
Fantastic. And also, friends, since you're listening to this podcast, make sure you head on over to your podcast player and listen in on Rebecca's podcasts as well. So today we're talking all about building relationships. So we know we've learned about this in our college courses. We have to know our students, but really, why? Why do we have to know our students? Why do we have to start to build those relationships with them? How does it help us?
I think that having strong relationships with your students is the ultimate way to get student buy-in. You know, if a student doesn't like a subject or even doesn't like school, but they respect you and you show them respect and there's that trust there, they're at least willing to, show respect to you and do their best in that way. Also, classroom management, that always gets thrown around. Student relationship is not the number one thing to fix all of classroom management problems, but it really does help when you have a relationship with a student and you're able to talk to them and they understand that you are coming from a place of caring and being on their side. It can really help to de-escalate situations and again, just any kind of relationship where you have trust. So I just think that it is the number one building block to teaching, and our classrooms are all communities, right?
Absolutely.
And whether you have one elementary school class or with 20, 30 kids or whatever, hopefully not 30, but that tends to happen. Or
Let's
if
go
you
with
have
20.
100, yeah, we'll go with 20. Or if you have 120 high schoolers coming through your classroom throughout the day, each individual class is different. And really, if you want to reach those students, you might have to approach each class different. So it's just essential to get to know them.
It really is. And I like how you separated apart classroom management and building relationships, and how building relationships is not the end all and be all to classroom management, but it's a good starting block, a good starting place.
Right. It makes a huge difference.
It really does. Now, Rebecca, you know that this podcast is mostly for student teachers, new teachers, and let's focus in on those student teachers for a moment who are listening in. They come into a classroom, let's say they're student teaching in the spring, there's already relationships, procedures, and all that stuff already built in. So they're coming in the middle of the year, they're doing maybe a 6, 7, 10-week placement. What are some ways that they can really step forward in the classroom and build those relationships with students? I know that they're going to be temporary in the classroom. They're not the teacher of record, but it's going to help them with their classroom management, lesson design, all those types of things. So, what are some ways that our student teachers who are listening in, who might be in a short term placement, start to build those critical relationships with students?
Yeah, and that's a good point that sometimes with the short term, and also I just want to point out too, sometimes when you're student teaching or in your first, second year of teaching, it can be overwhelming. And sometimes the thing that we forget
Mhm.
about is establishing those relationships. So yeah, I have just some simple ideas that don't take a lot of time or effort, but really help you get to know your students. Okay, so first and foremost, names matter. And I think sometimes we forget the power of a name. And learning students' names and how to
Yes.
pronounce them correctly just shows so much respect. And I say this as somebody who's terrible with names. Like, I'm so bad with names. And, I'll get 120 new students every year. But you have to really make that effort and do it in those
Yeah.
first few days, and don't be afraid to mess up. Don't be afraid to mispronounce a name. They get it. Just be kind
Hmm.
about it. Ask, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" I've even had students I've had them record their name pronunciation into my notes. Students
Hmm.
we get a lot of foreign exchange students. And I just want to make sure that I can do it correctly. And I know as a child, I had a speech
Hmm.
impediment, and I don't always hear differences. And I need a little bit of practice. And they respect that, and they appreciate that. So, and you can do that by
Yes.
doing games, by just saying hi to them in the hallway. Just anytime you can throw their name in there, or even just ask their name. Listen to, if you're having trouble, listen to what their peers say.
You
Just paying
mentioned saying
attention to
hi in the
that, because that
hallway
makes
and
a
stuff
huge
like that. I
difference.
think that's a really good indicator if you know the student's name, if you recognize them out of context, like out of your classroom, or maybe not wearing what they wore. Like I teach college, so they sometimes they change clothes from the morning to the afternoon. Like, is
Yeah.
your name? Are you? Yes, yes. So I get that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
And when they cut their hair, or, it's like, "Oh, no." And so you start to rely on those things, and
Yes.
you
Keep
can't do that. You
going.
really gotta get to know them. So, um, my second one is a student survey. So,
Mm.
I always call this, like, the power of the student survey. So, I do a student survey at the beginning of the year,
What?
and
That's
then what I
new.
do is I actually read them. So, a lot of times I think teachers do that survey, yeah, and they put them away. They might glance at them because you get so busy, you don't make it a priority. But I do a student survey. It says things like, "What do you like to do for fun?" "Who are your friends?" And things like that. I also add in there,
Mm.
"Do you have access to the internet at home?" Which isn't as much of a thing today, because I think a lot of times
Mhm.
at district level, sometimes school will take care of that. But what other responsibilities do you have outside of school? That way, if they work, or even if they're young, if they have to do chores or whatever, you're kind of getting an idea of what the student's life is like. But if you do that and then you read through them, you can take something from every single one of those, and, in the hallway, be like, "Oh, I heard you like
Mhm.
basketball. Do you watch, the Pacers or whatever?" I'm from Indiana, so we have the Pacers here. But
That's okay.
excuse me. Um, but yeah, and so just you just take a look at those, and you really kind of digest them, and just try to pick out one thing from
Yes.
each one, and then talk to the student about it. And that's kind of my third point, is small talk is really important. And taking that time to talk to your students about something that is not schoolwork really shows them that you're interested in their life. One thing that I do with small talk, and I do think it's really important, is I will take some time, probably 5 minutes out of class every single day, to just visit with the students. And I know a lot of people get really stressed out about that, like, well, there's so
Yeah.
much to teach, and there is. But again, I think the foundation of good teaching is the relationship with your students. So sometimes if I have a class with somebody who likes a
Mhm.
lot of attention, I will start with the beginning of class. We won't even go straight into the bell work, or maybe we will, and they'll do their bell work, but then we'll talk. And it kind of lets that kid who needs the attention get the attention that he needs. Or if I have a quieter class that likes to get right to work,
Mm-hmm.
I'll walk around while they're doing individual work or other things and just kind of be like, "Oh, hey, how'd the soccer game go last night?" Or if you see a student, yeah, and if you see a student
Nice.
doodling, be
Yes.
like, "Oh, I like that." Do ask about art or ask if they just like to doodle or whatever. Just engaging in those little ways
Mhm.
makes a really big difference.
It really does. And you know
They
what?
do.
The students notice. They really do. They
They notice,
notice when you take
and
that time.
you can see when you have a good relationship with the students versus when you see a teacher that they don't have a good relationship with, which always kind of breaks my heart because they feel like those teachers don't care. They do care, they just show it differently, or they have a different teaching style or
Mhm.
whatever. But it
Yeah.
does help with that. Um,
Mhm. So we shared about knowing students' names, how to pronounce them, doing a survey and reading it. And then we talked about, having time in those little moments with our students, conversations, that small talk. What other tips do we have? And Rebecca, just a side note, I love how these can be used across grade levels. They're not just for middle school or not just for high school. These are things we
yeah,
can use
absolutely,
across those
because
grade
I think,
levels.
relationships with students and with anybody. I mean, you could use this with adults, right? Just like if you have trouble with getting to know
Mhm.
people, these
Mhm.
are things that you can do. So another tip, I think it's important to show that you value their opinions. So something that I will do occasionally, whether it's the end of the week, beginning of the week, and just whenever, I will sometimes have an exit ticket or bell work, and I will ask them, I need a movie to watch this weekend. Can you recommend a movie or a show or a book to read or a song to listen to? Anything like that. Sometimes I'll just write it on the board and invite
Yes.
them to add one as they leave. And if they like something somebody else said, give a check mark or whatever. And well, and
Oh,
sometimes
I
they
like
like,
that.
I mean, they'll put
Yeah.
something that is way out there that is not of interest to me. Let's say they put like a horror film and I am not into horror. Like I will talk to them about that. I'll be like,
Mhm.
"Oh girl, I loved horror when I was in high school. I just can't watch it now." And we'll talk about it and we'll talk about what they like about it or some
Mhm.
that, I liked when I was younger. If a student likes anime, for example, and recommends some anime and I'm just not into anime, I can talk to them about oh, my nephew likes anime. I've seen him watch this show or read this. I don't even know what they're called. They're not comic books,
Mhm.
whatever they're called, but graphic novels. Yeah,
Graphic
I guess that's a
novel?
comic book of whatever. But like, I will connect to them in that way, and sometimes I will recommend something, and sometimes they're like, "You're old. I'm not interested in that." And every once in a while, they're like, and that's another point I want to make is you got to be okay. Don't take yourself too seriously. Like you cannot take yourself too seriously
Yes.
as a teacher. But yeah, if just asking for their opinions and then valuing those opinions enough to at least look up whatever it is they're recommending.
Rebecca, you mentioned that you would suggest something and like, "Oh, you're old." I had my students, they were talking in the beginning of class, and they're like, "We had a vintage movie
No.
night." I'm like, "Oh, what did you watch that was vintage?" And they said, "10
Oh,
things I hate about you." I was like,
yeah,
that hurt. That hurt, man. That hurt."
right.
I was like, "That was cool when I was in high school. That's not vintage." But I get you. I get you on that. All right, what's our last tip for building?
Okay, so my last one is to support their extracurricular activities, which does take some time out of your day. But even if, like, let's say elementary school, you have a robotics club after school and they're meeting in the library or the cafeteria. On your way out, pop in and just say, "Hey, what are you working on?" Spend 5 minutes on your way out the door, just showing that you're interested in it, right? And for sports, as a high school teacher, don't just go to the football games. I always try to make it to one tennis match, one volleyball, one track, whatever. Try to make it to one event for each one. And sometimes you can't. I have young kids, it's hard. But the students see you there and they notice it and they really
Yes,
appreciate it.
they do. They do. That's a great one. So let me recap our 5 tips. 1, get to know students' names and how to pronounce them. Pronounce them. 2, do a student interest survey. You shared some great questions to add to that student interest survey. And they can also go ahead and Google student interest survey questions for and then a specific grade level that they're looking for. Read that student interest survey and get that feedback. Connect with them through small talk, through before the class ends, as the class is beginning, just some small talk questions. I love the example of, I want a movie to watch this weekend. What do you suggest? And then the getting involved outside of class in whatever they're interested in, whatever they're involved in. That includes theater, musicals, sporting events, all these things that they're in. And I think that's, they notice all these small things that you do to start to build those relationships. Now, Rebecca, what if we have a student who's tough to reach, who's tough to connect with? What tips do you have for that?
Sometimes you do have a student who's maybe you just like your personalities don't go super great together, or they're just real, kind of closed in, whether they're shy or whatever. Sometimes I think doing these things, even with them, if it doesn't seem like it's, radiating with them and they're not giving you great feedback, that doesn't mean that they don't trust you. I've had students where I was like, man, this kid just, I don't know if he doesn't like me or if we're just not, he's not giving me the positive vibes that I get from a lot of my other students. But when
Mhm.
he had an issue, he actually came to me and talked
Wow.
to me about it. So I think that doing those quiet things like asking for bell work, doing the surveys, and then just checking in with them, um, I think those are important. And you can't reach every single student to the level that you're going to reach.
Mhm.
It's not something that's going to go across the board, especially when secondary you have 120 students. But I
Yeah,
think it's important to also watch that student and make sure that they do have somebody in the building to connect with. Say they're not connecting with you, you might reach out to another teacher or a counselor and be like, hey, can you check in on this kid? Because it might also be something
I
else
love
going on
that.
at home.
Yeah, that's a fantastic strategy. I like how you shared, is there an adult that cares about that student in the building? Hopefully they're connecting with that student, checking with the counselor, just in case something's going on. And I like how you shared, it's not about you, the teacher, it's about that student, and you're still going to work to reach them.
Right, right. Yeah. It's always all about the student. I think sometimes teachers can forget that. But it's 100% all about
Little
that
friendly
student.
reminder,
And
a little friendly reminder.
yeah, right. And I do think that where some teachers go wrong is they're not sincere about it. And here's the thing,
Mm,
even my second grader knows when I'm not paying attention to him and I'm just
mhm.
answering or I'm just not sincere in what I say. Like none of this works unless you're sincere in your interest in the student. You don't have
Yeah.
to like what they're interested in. You just have to be interested in the fact that they are interested in that.
Right. I like the importance of being genuine and being sincere in those really in the relationship building. Rebecca, this has been a fantastic conversation. Lots of little ideas for student teachers, new teachers to go ahead and use. Getting to know students isn't something you do just the first week, the first day. It's something you continue to do throughout the semester, throughout the 9 weeks that you're connecting with your students, because it's something that never goes away.
Oh,
Could you
absolutely. Absolutely.
Could you please share how my listeners can get in touch with you and learn more and listen to your podcast?
Sure. You can find me pretty much anywhere with the handle at History from Room 213. It's 213. My podcast is History from Room 213. And I have a website that is
I was gonna guess
historyfromroom213.com.
that.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure I put all those in the show notes as well, just so they have access to that and they can go and they can click right on your podcast, give it a listen, and give you a follow on social. Check out your website. Rebecca, thank you so much for taking your time today and sharing with our listeners those 5 great tips to support relationship building in our classrooms. We learned about why it's important, 5 fantastic strategies that you can get started with today, tomorrow, next week, and continue to do throughout your year with your students. And you also shared a great strategy for students who may be a little hard to reach, making sure that there's an adult there that cares about them. Again, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this.
All right. All right, friends, remember you have the edgy magic within you. Bye for now.
have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.